Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing A Woman Under the Influence. This film came out in 1974 and it was directed by John Cassavetes. We all know Cassavetes as a multi-talented guy. He is a brilliant actor, but he's also a very famous director who became a pioneer for a certain type of immersive filmmaking and acting style. He isn't interested in depth in a traditional sense. He's not interested in like the theatrics and the artifice of performance. He's more interested in kind of getting into something more internal, something that's more raw and rough and pure emotion. And he depicts it here with like a very grainy cinema verite, stripped down aesthetic to reflect this. And the plot and the narrative structure attempts to be more invisible here. And a lot of the complexity of those interactions are drawn out more through smaller improvisational moments. And there is something very interesting about that style. It's certainly derived from like French New Wave in the 1960s, but it's still its own thing. It seems like Cassavetes kind of wants to explore the trigger points of his characters through improvisation, much more than any sort of, thought. This film does feel very much like a response to its era. It is about the social environment of 1970s America. And this movie, of course, is about an American family and the turbulence beneath the surface that exists in a particular marriage. And all that turbulence here is personified or symbolized, I suppose you could say, through the idea of mental illness and just the ways that we perceive mental illness. There's a lot, I think, that goes on in the viewer's mind in terms of questioning stability and sanity of all kinds of different characters, I think. But you arrive at that place by allowing the actors a certain freedom in guiding the material themselves. And this film is it's docudrama realism, as I said. There's no sense of glamour at all here, though it does feel cinematic for sure at times. There is no sense of romanticism. There are a lot of shots that dart back and forth, and it has just a very jumbled sort of chaotic feeling to it. And with Cassavetes, all of that fits right in line with just his whole philosophy, it seems, because he isn't a cerebral guy, and he isn't interested in kind of the typical kind of method acting tradition of building a character from the ground up and finding, the background of the character. Again, it's about trying to create something that feels maybe less manufactured and less traditional than it has been in the past, and it does allow for some really incredible moments, certainly some very haunting and beautiful moments, but also a lot of ugly moments. But all of that is certainly very necessary. There are really devastating moments in this film that really stick with me, and yet, just overall, when I think about the movie, I do struggle with it. And it's one of those things where I feel quite torn about it, because I know that it is supposed to be very maddening by design, and I can get behind that, of course, to a degree, but it almost feels as if it goes a little bit too far in that direction, almost as if it's kind of shrouded in this need for authenticity. It's like it's drowning in it. And the burden of that really weighs heavily on the shoulders of the performers to shape the material into something that is very resonant. And of course, in this script, or I should say just in this story overall, there are a lot of tangled webs beneath the surface. Some of them are very powerful, and then others do feel, more like a slog. As a story, in order for me to really gain something from it in the way that I think that this film kind of wanted me to, I feel like it needed to have a more solid foundation. And that way we have a really nice, very well-rounded portrait of mental illness, but it feels really only skin deep just when I look at the film overall. And it is a really weird effect, because certain scenes, when I watch them individually and I take them out of context, I find a lot to admire, and I find almost more depth to it than I do when I watch it, just as a full movie, the full runtime. I really admire the boldness, and I admire certainly the bravery of the actors, but there's something about that, just that searing violence, that doesn't help me to really understand it or really understand the characters, where I'm really gaining something in terms of what it's wanting to say about domestic life, what it's wanting to say about social repression, feminine repression. Peter Falk here plays the husband, and I think he just owns every single frame, every single moment he's on screen, but I feel that way about the majority of his roles that I've seen him in. He is just so amazingly interesting, very gruff and very hardened. And I like that there's that dark edge to him always. It goes beyond kind of the traditional James Dean-esque blackness. But yeah, when you look into that face, there's just a lot going on there. Like there's a bleakness there that is void of any sort of romanticism, as I said, which is of course important for a film like this. But yeah, I don't know, something about his face is also very warm and inviting at the same time, which is also very key. A face really does need to tell a story, for sure, in a cinematic sense, because this is not a play. I know they wanted it to be a play, but no, it's meant to be a film experience. So the rhythm of the camera and all that is very important and has to be very immediate. And this is about somebody who is like a working class guy. So, you know, he is very drab in appearance, yet you can sense just how much life he's lived, and that he likely has many, many stories to tell. And I just think it's a brilliant choice. And then there is Gena Rowlands, who famously plays Mabel Ungetty, the wife, and this is considered probably one of the great American performances by an actress. And I find her quality as an actress, and just in terms of her look, to be very unexpected for this particular character, because you can never quite see the wheels turning beyond the exterior with her. You're never really let into her internal world, so all you can really do is speculate what's going on in that mind of hers, and any sort of hysteria that you might see in the eyes, just like little flickers of it. You're not quite sure what to make of it. It feels like some things are in the light, but a lot of things are in shadow, and that is there is a danger there for sure. And it's, I don't know, I usually with these kinds of roles, you expect a certain type of woman to be cast. You know, I normally think of people like Isabelle Adjani. You know, she has a very expressive, crazed look in her eyes, very manic. And then you look at Gena Rowlands, it's almost opposite. She's almost beetle-like, her eyes. It's just like frazzled nerves that are hidden behind this very cold, very conditioned exterior. And because of that, there's something very distant about her, which make the emotions feel all the more scary. She appears to be like a ticking time bomb, and there's so much in her mannerisms that make you think that she could go off at any point. She's very strong, surprisingly. She's very forceful in her voice, and a command to the performance as well. And her movements are very jerky. Sometimes they feel very deliberate, other times they feel very aimless. She reminds me of like a child. And I don't know, I just find it refreshing that she's not necessarily weak or delicate in the ways that, you know, she very easily could have been. To me, she looks like a haggard Angie Dickinson of the time, or like at least just like a de-glamorized version of her. She feels like Angie Dickinson in real life. Like, let's say she wasn't a movie star. Let's say she came from completely different circumstances. Let's say she's working 2 jobs and she has 4 kids and she has a meth addiction and she's been in and out of mental hospitals. If that was the case, this is probably more what Angie Dickinson would look like. And it is interesting because Mabel Ungetty, I consider to be quite attractive in a lot of ways. In certain lights, you can really see that beauty, that Angie Dickinson appeal. But then in harsher lights or in different lights, she looks older and definitely more ghost-like and worn down. And as I said before, when I take individual scenes, I really admire her performance in increments a lot. But I think fully as an experience, it doesn't come together fully, just because it starts to get a little bit monotonous, because she's always like dialed up to 11, or not always, but a lot of the time she's very dialed up to 11. And of course, there are varying kinds of mental illnesses. Certain people experience certain symptoms and whatnot. And even if it seems a little bit of a stretch, there is suspension of disbelief, you know, in a cinematic sense. But I don't know, for me, her performance contributes to this overall feeling I have in the movie of being shrouded in viscera, shrouded in a very unwavering feeling for a very long runtime. The thing is, though, with Mabel, even though you feel like you need to always keep an eye on her, she never really does anything harmful or violent to anybody outwardly. Yet she is always treated as if she's doing it a lot. And I don't know, when I first saw this film, I couldn't help but think of a lot of American movies from the 1970s that, you know, they're meant to be like a slice of American domestic life, especially when things for women are changing and for men as well. And I like to think about like Kramer versus Kramer, a 70s film that is a good example of that, because it's subverting the tropes of like, you know, a woman typically keeping custody of the child in a divorce in this film, it is about a man keeping custody of the child because the mother has decided, she no longer wants the identity of being a mother and a wife. And the film is a very interesting one, but, still, when it comes down to it, that the character, Meryl Streep's character, the wife, is technically the antagonist. And I don't mean it in the sense of like, oh, she's evil and it's like a good versus evil sort of thing. But, just in a basic level, I mean, that's the function that she serves in this particular story, because she is the obstacle that the boys have to overcome. And I like that in A Woman Under the Influence, that idea, that symbolic female figure is maybe more kind of the focus, more the center here. But at the same time, it feels like she still kind of stands for that grand idea of just like the misunderstood woman that is still kind of thinly sketched. Mabel has very little control over her life in this movie, and that's a very tragic thing to witness as a viewer. And she is often the victim here. And I think to a certain degree that is a little bit limiting narratively. Perhaps it is just a personal taste thing, but I tend to prefer stories or movies like A Streetcar Named Desire, as an example, or a play like Long Day's Journey into Night. Those are naturally more kind of traditional pieces compared to what Cassavetes is doing here. But for me, they do, in a very similar way, give us like, a slice of life, insight into what it's like to be an unstable person, to exist in some sort of domestic situation where you don't fit the mold of society, and you just don't fit in the world that you were born into. So many people experience this. So it's a very interesting thing to probe, I think. And I just think that there are more well-rounded portraits out there of this descent into madness. Like the characters in Streetcar Named Desire, as an example, that like they develop and they surprise you. They have places that they go, for sure. There's light and shade, and they're not just fluctuating between like two extremes of like, really manic and then just kind of down. And I just think that there's more thought put into the mood and the way that the characters are built and the way that they bounce off each other. And I do think that there are ways of doing that in this more immediate, more visceral style that Cassavetes is going for. I think actually it's kind of the opposite. I know he wants to give his actors a lot of power here, and I think that's good to a degree, but I think actually, ironically, a lot of serious detail needs to go into things so that you can liberate the actors once the time is ready. I've just noticed that tends to be kind of an interesting technique. Mabel just is very alienated from all the adults in her life, basically, even her own husband in a lot of ways. But yet she can converse with children quite easily, and they seem to really understand her. And I like a lot of those moments. I think they're really needed. Just kind of a softer moment, a quieter moment to kind of give us a break from all that we see. But it is very reactionary. And still, I feel like the actors are really carrying so much of the bulk of everything. And therefore, I really don't feel like I arrive at anything when I see these scenes. There is a live wire energy to where you start to wonder, it's like, who really is the insane one here? And I think there are a lot of different answers that you can come up with there. But especially when it comes to the husband and the wife here, I think they're both really kind of similarly on the same level of toxic, or I should say mentally unstable. The parenting style of the father, as an example, is very 1970s and fun to see, but also, very concerning at the same time. And, he is very abusive and quite clueless on certain levels to what his wife is going through. But at the same time, he's also very forgiving, but also that makes him kind of forgivable too. And what really needs to happen is Mabel needs to forgive him. If she doesn't forgive him, then it all falls apart, but she does, because Peter Falk has that quality, again, to where he can be forgiven. Maybe you wouldn't forgive him, but she needs to be the one to forgive him. But yes, ultimately, this story is also that tragic symbol of the wife still receiving a lot of the punishment, and she is ultimately the one who is misunderstood and silenced in the end, and just a sign of the times, and a very, very, very tragic thing. The final, I say the third act of this film is a tough experience, but I appreciate it. I like the bluntness of it. I like the honesty of it. I actually really thought that the third act was one of the better sections. I don't say that very often, but you get lost in the aftermath of everything. You get lost in the rhythm of it all. But then once all the smoke clears and we're at the end of the film, I'm still kind of torn and struggling with what I feel about it, because there's just a monotony that I can't let go of in terms of just how it rubs me the wrong way at times. And I just feel like I want to gain something more, and I think this film wants me to gain more, and yet I'm not quite there. Because I think Cassavetes really wants to tell an important tale, you know, a serious, raw account of the sad realities of mental illness. So yeah, I mean, I do think if you're a big cinephile, then I would watch this for sure, because it is Cassavetes and it's an interesting style and it gives you insight into a lot of different directors and how they were influenced by this particular style. If you're just a casual moviegoer, I might skip it because you'll likely struggle with it. But if you're somebody that really likes to tackle these kinds of things, for sure, I say check it out. But that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist and I do commission portraits and I sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below. Also, I want to give a shout out to my patrons who are wonderful. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.